Monopolistic competition, what's in the middle of that spectrum from perfectly competitive market to monopoly. Some of the features, so you have in multiple places what I wrote down earlier about monopolies and perfectly competitive firms. Some of the features, leave yourself some room because we're going to annotate as we go through. In monopolistically competitive market, products are similar, but not identical. Firms have some price control. There's free entry and exit.
Dr. O'Donnell?
Yes.
I also have a question about what counts as a monopoly. Because if products are similar but not identical, monopolistic competition, doesn't that mean that pretty much every firm has a monopoly over their product if it's not
Exactly. So consider the best example is the toothpaste market. Another good example is the smartphone.
Oh, I was thinking that.
Look at that.
Jinx, you owe me a soda.
Okay. Speaking of which, Coke and Pepsi are pretty close to monopolistic competitive as well.
McDonald's, Burger King.
So there's a bunch of different brands of toothpaste. Colgate, Crest, Sensodyne. This is a good categories game if you're ever playing one of those games like the campfire game. Come up with all the different toothpaste. So then, Aquafresh comes up with Aquafresh whitening. And guess what happens with Aquafresh whitening? They're the only one that has it. So, yep, they have increasing marginal cost. They have decreasing then increasing average total cost. And the demand for Aquafresh whitening, they see the entire demand curve. Here's the demand, ... for their product. Aquafresh faces the demand for the entire, or sees the demand for their product, for the entire market for their product. Chris, 100%. They have a monopoly, this is a monopoly graph, over their product. So, what are they going to do? They're going to hold back some production, raise the price. That's what monopolies do. How do they figure out? Well, they look at their marginal revenue. Remember, marginal revenue is steeper because in order to sell more, they need to lower the price.
So what was the EpiPen?
Monopolistically competitive, I think.
So there are other.
Well, I don't know enough about patents. I'm not sure.
I think.
You have to look up the patent.
Yeah. Wouldn't they just be a strict monopoly if no one else makes it?
But so that's why I'm not sure if they have a patent over that. So my gut instinct, because their medication is that it's monopolistically competitive. But I don't know if they have.
I didn't have a patent. I don't think the patent's over yet to make a generic brand.
This is a combination between monopoly and competitive.
So how are they going to decide what to make? They're going to look for when marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Remember I said that we're at a point now where nothing is brand new in the micro curriculum. Things are just like applications of. So they look for when marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And find that optimal quantity.
Why is the marginal revenue so steep?
I'm asking you to check your notes and your reading on that. Because that was
The power of monopolistic competition. Or just in general. Okay. So it's not like as steep as the ground.
It's double.
Oh, it's usually the horizontal. expose me, I don't care, I just wondered.
So,
This is my original copy, but let's check that.
I'm here on these.
So they figure out when they're profit maximizing, when marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Where do they get the price from? The demand curve. Way over here, just for fun, is where price equals the marginal cost, allocatively efficient. They produce less for a higher price. That's what monopolies do. How come? Because Colgate Whitening put a ton of research and development into their new product, so they want to reap the benefits. Doesn't take long for Crest to buy a thing of Colgate Whitening, put it in the laboratory, look at it under a microscope, decompose it, and what do?
Duplicate.
Make a better
They
one.
do the same thing, right? Yeah, better one. They try to be like, now Colgate with like little green dots in it that's even more whitening.
I like the crest white.
So, this is the short run. For the firm, this one firm, Colgate, not for the entire market. So, somewhere else, Crest now has their little monopolistically competitive graph scenario. All these people that said, oh, I want this whitening toothpaste, that seems awesome. They just said, well, I sort of like Crest, so I'm going to go back to Crest's whitening. Back to Unit 2. What happens to the demand curve for Colgate Whitening? This is the demand curve for Colgate Whitening. This is which way you're pointing. Left. Why? Here's quantity, right? This is quantity. There's going to be less demand for that product. Andrew, how come?
because there's another product similar.
Yeah. So the quantity is going to decrease some. New quantity. Oh, sorry, I missed a quick step here. Just because this is fun, not fun, this is relevant review. Before the new firm came in, Colgate Whitening was making revenue. Here's price times quantity. This big thing is revenue. I just misspoke, they're making profit. This big rectangle is revenue. Quantity times average total cost is total cost. So this big rectangle here is revenue minus total cost. So this big thing is profit. But now this, okay with profit, that's just going back to last week's Monopoly stuff. Good news, and probably why people do better on that final test than they have throughout the semester is because you get like extra reps of all the different pieces. So this is just a monopoly. Then what happens? Demand curve shifts. So we're picking things out. Boom, from chapter 15. Monopoly, graph, profit, etc. From chapter like 4 or 6, a shift of the demand curve. Shift of the marginal revenue curve. So here's quantity 2, price 2, this little box in here is the new profit. That profit is less. Does that connect? Don't just yell out, but think for a second. Does that connect with common sense? You're Colgate. You have a new whitening toothpaste, and you're making a lot of profit. And Crest says, "Nuh-uh, I'm going to make one too." And what happens? Your profit goes down. Does this graphical representation match common sense? Yes. You're making a lot of profit, and then a competitor comes in and takes away some of your profit.
Oh.
You're,
I thought you meant like when you said you, I thought you meant like the competition. Like
I meant what? Oh.
Never mind, I get it now.
Gotcha. But this is just Colgate and what's happening to them in the short run. This is why, and this is where monopolistic competition gets exciting, and all of the questions that you're going to ask are completely relevant, accurate, and the basis for great challenge by choice opportunities. So now what happens between Colgate and Crest and Aqua Fresh and all the other companies? What happens? They compete. How do they compete?
Price.
How do they compete?
Monopolistically.
And what do they do to compete?
They like lower the
Prices.
prices and.
Okay, so they might, so some price control. So they might
Change their.
have a price war. What's a price war? They might try to lower their price to try to get people. Okay.
Marketing.
Marketing.
Change their product.
What did you say?
Yeah, like modify their
I see.
product.
Make a new product. What else might they do?
What is the try to like buy over like new products.
Or
Expand.
Cause like, yeah, I like my uncle, like he used to work in like the like mailing industry or something, and he like kept like he would like make a company and like grow it for like their mailing services, and then like sell it to like all like different people, and then they kept doing it over and over again. So then like the competition paid him not to work anymore, to stop like building businesses.
Yeah, that's I didn't have this example ready to talk through, but think of like the market for social media users. Okay, you have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. Let's stick with those four for now. They're competing for users. They differentiate their product by saying, "Look, we have cool filters or whatever those are. What are they?
dog filter.
They maybe market to be like, oh look, Facebook is only for older people that look at their friends' kids. It's not for like cool kids to do. Price war is not super relevant because they're mostly free services.
So merging
But
these
then,
ones.
yeah, so then if I want to compete with them, free entry, I want to compete with them. So this happened, I think maybe when you were in 9th grade, an EA alum, I think his name is Jeff Long, came and he had a company that was bought by Twitter. He might have been in 8th grade.
Oh yeah.
He was in the theater.
Yeah.
So he has a company, and is Instagram owned by Facebook?
Yeah.
Okay, so you lose a little bit of competition there. But what do? They purchase the competitors, and then that guy Jeff Long had like a 5-year non-compete clause with Twitter, and just like last year, I think he quit his job at Twitter and started up like a new company, a new startup. What that fun?
Oh.
Some-
That happens every year.
I remember that from last year.
Water, dripping.
I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. So, where was I? Oh, marketing. Briefly about marketing. I gave you 2 sections in the reading. The first is the basics of monopolistic competition. The second is about marketing, advertising, etc. When I was 18 to 30, I used to hear what I'm about to say, and I used to think, no way, that's not true. I used to say the coveted 18 to 30 demographic, or 18 to 25 demographic. Companies spend kabillions to get 18 to 30-year-olds to like their product. As a 34-year-old, I only go to like the same 4 or 5 restaurants because I know what to expect. I would rather watch Bourne Identity 3 than watch some new space movie on TV. I have like the pizza place that I order from. Sometimes for my birthday or for Christmas when I go visit my mom, she's like, I found this new thing you're gonna like at the grocery store. And I say, no, I want you to get the thing that I like. That's different from when she buys what I used to like when I was like 15. But like stuff that I eat and drink, like meals, etc., are just like, that's what I like, that's what I get. I used to think like when I was 24 years old, well, I'm always going to be like, oh, this is the cool new thing. I'm going to like always be up to date and like try the new restaurants. I don't want to try a new restaurant and a new entree. I want to find something that I know I'm going to like it and be happy about it.
So I'm really angry about it.
I'm not angry at all.
Your mom gets mad in this case.
No, she doesn't.
Because of the pumpkin soup example.
Yeah, that's true.
You kicked her out of the kitchen.
That's true.
You're not efficient.
That's because you can like relate to. That's because you can sort of relate to it.
No.
So marketers spend so much money because they know. Think about the marginal. I don't know the right word. The marginal attraction per dollar. When I was 25 and like some new
Utility.
like drink would come through, I'd be like, okay, I'll try that. Marketers didn't have to spend a ton of money to get me to try their product or to like switch between products. Now, it's super expensive to try to get me to switch. You have to have like an unbelievable like ad campaign that makes me really rethink my like beliefs. I have the same pair of slippers, they're new, I just get new ones. I found like 3 years ago a nice pair of like Brooks running shoes. You know what I get? I find like ones on Amazon from like 2014 Brooks running shoes, and I get those when I need like new sneakers. I like those. I'm not going to try a new sneaker every single time. I have something that I like. But when you're like 18, 19, 20, you get hammered by a bunch of different advertisements that come in and say, use this product, try this brand. Like, I'm going to get new sweatpants for Christmas, and they're going to be Nike sweatpants with pockets. Because that's what I like, period. A couple years ago, Groupon had the super cheap deal for like jogger sweatpant things, and I got some, and they were great. But it was like they had to sell them to me for like $8 for me to like make this change. Right? They're not making much profit.
I'm kind of like that way.
Everybody's sort of like, you get set in your ways. It's hard. It's hard to like get what's called market share.
How difficult would it be for you to switch from like Apple to Samsung?
Yeah, really hard. I know how to use my iPhone. Like, I have muscle memory built up. I have like all my things, right? And I have no interest in doing it. It would have to be a really high price for me to switch. Also, there's a thing called like inertia, which in physics means things just keep going in the same direction. But inertia just means, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to keep AT&T. You know why? Because that's what I have. I'm not going to like think about.
I just switched to Verizon.
There you have it.
My
Definitely
parents
the
like
move though.
changed our whole like TV.
I couldn't get
system.
service in my
Like,
house, so I
didn't
switched.
know, and I like freaked out. Like,
Yeah.
What do you have now?
I don't even know.
It's like 100% smooth.
But I went through and changed my internet and TV because the price got prohibitively high.
Like, I couldn't get service in my house, so that we went to Verizon.
Product differentiation. What's an example of product differentiation?
Like with your toothpaste, like putting the green dots.
Put in the green dots because it's better.
Facial recognition.
Facial recognition,
Making the screen bigger.
making a bigger screen. What's the difference between iPhones and Samsungs?
Everything.
Samsung's
Upgrade.
the brand.
Samsung,
And
iPhones have
the symbol on the back.
Yeah.
So,
You could use Wi-Fi.
last year,
So
Samsung phones, I think the Samsung 7s, started blowing up when you charge them. On the surface, a non-economist would say that's bad because they had to refund everybody's money that bought those phones, so they didn't make any profit. Boo-hoo, that's bad for Samsung. It's really bad for Samsung. You know why? What did everybody who had a Samsung 7 do?
Switch to iPhone.
And what happened?
The demand
Like
curve
the
was
iPhone.
dramatically
Exactly. The demand curve.
It
Oh,
was better.
hey, Samsung's getting cheaper and they have like the side-to-side screens. So here's Apple's market share. Their demand curve is shifting. Oh, Samsung's phone blows up. I'm now going to buy Apple phones, and the demand shifts. Firms are fighting to keep their demand curve as high as possible, whether that's vertically or horizontally out. How come? Bigger profit.
Qdoba has like queso. Chipotle didn't used to have queso. Like the same thing.
He gets a tennis bag.
Sometimes when they sleep a week after
Sure,
you
right.
get
Everyone,
All right.
Burger King does onion rings. McDonald's does.
More product differentiation. Examples, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Oh, we're still on that.
McDonald's says the Big Mac. Burger King doesn't. McDonald's says the Big Mac.
Well, that's not really, no, but then Burger King is a lot.
No.
See? Look at that. Big Mac and the or the whatever
Whopper.
and the Whopper.
A Whopper.
Products are similar, but not identical. All right, in the long run. So in the short run, they're a monopoly. Why does the demand curve shift? Because of free entry. Coke and Pepsi. Okay, in dotted lines, I wrote the demand and the marginal revenue for Coke. They're making profit here. I'm not going to draw it because I don't want to get it all messy, but essentially it looks like this. What happens? There's profit to be made. So what happens? What happened in perfect competition when there was profit to be made? So who makes more? The firm's already making their profit maximizing amount.
So, what do you mean?
What happened when Colgate was making money? What happened?
Raise the price.
Yep, they're already at the profit maximizing quantity and price. What happens in the world? Other companies enter. And what happened what was like the big takeaway from perfect competition? There's one major takeaway.
It's not possible.
Okay, so fair. In theory, what was the big takeaway? What's the big theoretical takeaway from perfect competition?
One price.
That's one of like the factors or definitions of it. But what was like the big result?
They just accept the price. As it is.
Price takers.
Oh, perfectly elastic price.
They face a perfectly elastic demand curve. Good. These are all like attributes of perfect competition. What was like the big takeaway? Goods are the same. What doesn't change? The product's like the same. There's profit to be made. More firms enter. What does that do to the big P word?
Profit.
What does it do to profit as firms enter? How far does it lower? Down to zero. The theory, perfect competition never happens in real life, but in theory, in the long run, profits get ground down to zero. If there's profit to be made, more firms will enter. The same thing happens with monopolistic competition. Here's a demand curve. Pepsi joins the cola market. Boom. RC Cola joins. The demand doesn't really change that much. Then Adams Cola. I do this whole thing like, hey, a penny a bottle. That's my marketing scheme. I do Super Bowl ads. I send all my money that I've ever could earn to buy ads. And it's like a penny a bottle of Adams Cola, and it's fantastic. And what happens? The demand curve moves all the way down here. But what's going on with the demand curves here?
The marginal
The
revenue.
price, which comes from the demand curve, is below the average total cost. Still costs money to make cola. If I want to sell it for less, go ahead, but I'm going to make a negative profit or a loss. So what's going to happen when a firm makes a loss? They're going to leave the market. Like in equilibrium, a spring that drops from the ceiling and oscillates back and forth, demand is going to shift. Oh, you're losing money, making money. And in the long run, there's going to be profit ground down to zero. And the demand curve is going to just hit The average total cost curve.
What was that line?
This one?
Is that the?
This is demand with like my cola, which is like the price is going to be here, which is lower than the average total cost, which means there's going to be a loss.
Yeah.
So this is not super relevant. But this one is. This is the long run demand curve for monopolistically competitive market. Demand decreases, oh, it's a loss, firms enter, it oscillates back and forth, and boom, it lands right there.
So zero profit right there.
Exactly. So here's zero profit because here's the price. Marginal revenue gives us the quantity.
I don't understand why a firm would want to stay in the long run. If they're profit maximizing, like what's their point? Because they don't make any profit in the long run.
First off, the long run doesn't exist. There's a semi-famous economics quote that says, in the long run, everybody's dead. Because we just never get there. Also remember that this means there's no economic profit. In what's called like perfect market theory or perfect market hypothesis or efficient market hypothesis, which is something we'll talk about in finance when we talk in the second semester of macroeconomics, there's no profit to be made anywhere. There's no economic profit to be made anywhere. If there's economic profit, remember economic and accounting profit are different. So this might be that you walk away with like 2% because that's the going rate. It's 2%.
Why do we learn about long run if it never exists?
Because that's all we have. Like a perfect competition idea of profits being ground down to zero. What's happening with supermarkets? Are supermarkets monopolistically competitive or are they perfectly competitive? You could probably make an argument because they're not at the same location, so they can differentiate like where they're located or whatnot. What's happening in the grocery market world? There's no profits like to be made. Firms are barely like staying alive, etc. So they're maybe towards the long run. Coke and Pepsi are probably in some sort of like an equilibrium. This is with asterisks. The asterisks next to price and quantity correspond with like equilibrium. If you were to look at like, so why do we say like anything in physics? Because it's all like theoretical and like we need some vocabulary and some way to think about. Well, here's a new product. Where is it between the short run and the long run? Right, so like a spring goes from the top down, and even like if you were to look at it, it's still moving like a slight amount, even if it's like looks standing still. For what it's worth, I'm not trying to criticize physics at all, but like physics, there's so many things that are like questions are preceded by in a vacuum, comma, ignoring air resistance, comma, but that's like never really true. I was a physics minor. Just saying, be careful. You know, I might have some. I like no physics. All right, ready? Here's some other details on monopolistically competitive firms. The demand curve for monopolistically competition is relatively more elastic. This is hand waving and not like quantified. Like it's not like 3 times less elastic. But a monopolistically competitive firm faces a relatively more elastic demand curve. Why might that be the case?
Is it products are similar?
Yeah.
But not identical.
What's that called? Like back to
Substitutes?
yeah, they're substitutes.
Yeah.
Because monopolistic competitive products, we don't assume one product. identical products, right? They have substitutes. What's the substitute for Colgate? Crest, Aquafresh, Sensodyne.
You said relatively elastic.
So relatively more elastic, not relatively elastic like on the when we define demand curves as being
Greater than
inelastic, like perfectly elastic, inelastic, unit, elastic, perfectly elastic. It's not like it just means it's more elastic than monopoly faces because a monopoly only has one. As one product.
But it's because this is
More elastic because products
Yeah.
are simple.
But it would be not as elastic. Oh no, perfectly. Never mind.
So in the short run, firms produce when the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost to maximize profits, getting price from the demand curve. When firms make a profit, new firms enter, and that reduces the demand. In the long run, that demand curve keeps decreasing until it touches or is tangent to the average total cost. All that that means is that in the long run, it just touches it and keeps going because that's that spot when the price, which price times quantity is total revenue, and the average total cost times quantity gives us the total cost. Those are the same. No profit in the long run. Before we all get like excited and leave, that's the end of my lecture portion for monopolistically competitive markets. Let me turn this video off.